He's a little bit of a rascal, let's put it that way. So he either reminds me of my brother or me when I was younger, I'm not sure. But he's...
Okay, stay with this for a moment, because that title points to something far more serious than a family argument. In the account at the center of this story, Prince Louis is said to have noticed burn marks on his sister Charlotte and brought them to William's attention. The alleged injury was not treated as an ordinary accident for long, because the marks raised questions about what happened during a private family visit, who was present, and why Charlotte appeared frightened to speak. The detail that changed everything was not simply the injury itself. It was the suggestion that Charlotte had been alone with Camilla shortly before the burns appeared, and that she had allegedly been warned to keep quiet. William's reaction, according to the story, was immediate. He wanted answers, and he wanted every person who had been present questioned before anyone had time to settle on a convenient explanation. Hi viewers, if you saw a child hiding an injury and knew something was wrong, would you speak up or stay silent? Leave your answer in the comments, because this story turns on that exact choice. And if you believe a child's voice should never be pushed aside because powerful people are involved, subscribe and stay with this story. The scene begins with Louis looking at Charlotte's arm. He had not been searching for evidence. There was no investigation underway. There was no dramatic announcement waiting in the corridor. There was simply a child noticing another child behaving differently. Charlotte kept her left arm close to her body. She moved carefully. When Louis looked at her, she seemed to realize that he had noticed. She tried to turn away. That was what caught him. Not a scream, not a collapse, not some obvious emergency. A movement that did not belong. Louis looked again. The mark was partly hidden beneath Charlotte's sleeve, but enough of the skin was visible for him to understand that this was not an ordinary bruise. The skin appeared badly irritated, with several distinct areas of redness. Charlotte pulled the sleeve down. Louis did not let the moment pass. The account says he asked what happened. Charlotte did not answer immediately. She looked toward the adults, then back at him. That hesitation mattered, because it suggested that the injury was not the only thing she was afraid of. Louis eventually brought the matter to William. And that was the moment the story changed direction. William reportedly expected something much simpler when he was first alerted. A childhood accident, a burn from a household object, something unpleasant but explainable. Then he saw the marks. The expression on his face changed. There were several injuries rather than one. They appeared unusually defined, and their location made the explanation of a simple accidental touch harder to accept without further examination. William asked Charlotte what had happened. The first answer was hesitant. Then came the name that made the room suddenly feel smaller: Camilla. According to the account, Charlotte said the injuries happened during a private interaction after a family gathering. She allegedly described a heated styling tool being involved and claimed that she had been told not to tell anyone. That allegation was enough to change the temperature of the entire situation. William did not have the luxury of treating it as gossip. He was looking at an injury on his daughter. But he also understood what an accusation of this kind could mean inside a royal household. The person being accused was not an ordinary relative. Any attempt to investigate the matter could become a family crisis, a palace crisis, and potentially a public crisis. That was precisely why the first question became so important. Who else had been there? Charlotte's account pointed toward a private conversation after tea.
He's doing very well at the moment. He does like to keep having his nappy changed, and I did the first nappy, yeah, exactly. Where's the bad one, exactly?
People had apparently left. A member of staff was said to have been nearby earlier, but not during the crucial moment. That raised another question. Why had Charlotte been alone? And then another. If the injury had been accidental, why did the circumstances surrounding it appear so difficult to reconstruct? William's concern reportedly moved quickly from Charlotte's arm to the people around her. He wanted the timeline. He wanted to know when Charlotte had last been seen without the injury. He wanted to know when she had first been seen afterward. He wanted to know who had access to the room. He wanted to know who had prepared the original account. And most importantly, he wanted to know whether Charlotte had told anyone what she feared before she spoke to him. That final question would become much more important than anyone initially realized, because the story was not only about what allegedly happened to Charlotte. It was about what happened after, The first instinct inside a powerful institution is often to explain a disturbing event as quickly as possible. An accident, a misunderstanding, a child's confusion, a moment that became more serious in the retelling. Those explanations can sound reassuring, until the details refuse to fit. In this case, the physical marks became the first problem. The second was Charlotte's behavior. The third was the conflicting recollection of staff. And the fourth was the growing suspicion that someone might already have decided what the official version of events should be. William reportedly refused to accept that. He ordered that the people involved in the private visit should not have unsupervised access to his children while the matter was being examined. That decision was more than a protective measure. It was a message. Whatever had happened, it was no longer going to be dismissed simply because it involved family. But there was still one thing William did not know. The injury itself was only the visible part of the story. Somewhere in the palace's records, there was an account of what had happened. And if that account was accurate, it could settle the question. If it was incomplete, it could reveal a different problem. William did not yet know that the original report would become one of the most important pieces of evidence in the entire case. Before that discovery, however, the family had to establish what had actually happened to Charlotte. The first step was a medical examination. The injuries had to be documented carefully. Their appearance, size, location, and age all mattered. The purpose was not to turn suspicion into certainty, but to determine what the physical evidence could actually support. That examination was expected to clarify matters. Instead, it raised another uncomfortable possibility. The marks appeared consistent with contact from a heated cylindrical object. That did not, by itself, identify who caused them. It did not prove intent, but it made the word accident much harder to use casually. William was now facing two competing possibilities. Either a frightening chain of misunderstandings had developed around an unfortunate injury, or someone had deliberately hurt his daughter and then allowed the situation to be treated as something else. The difference between those two possibilities was enormous. And then Charlotte remembered something, a warning. Something she had said before the injury, something that, according to the account, another person may have heard. That detail had not been central when the story first surfaced. It was a small part of the timeline, almost easy to overlook. But investigators would later discover that the small detail was exactly where the larger mystery began. Because if Charlotte had warned someone before she was hurt,
I wasn't allowed to get away with it. I had every midwife staring at me going, you do it, you do it. He's a little, he's growing quite quickly actually, but he's a little fighter. He kind of, he wriggles around quite a lot.
Then the question was no longer simply who caused the injury. It was who heard her, who understood what she meant, and who chose not to act. There was another reason the discovery mattered. In a palace environment, records are not just paperwork. They create a timeline. They establish who knew what, when they knew it, and what was officially believed to have happened. If those records were clean, the investigation could move toward an explanation. If they had been changed, incomplete, or quietly rewritten, the investigation would have to move in a very different direction. For William, that distinction was becoming impossible to ignore. The family could argue about motives later. They could argue about misunderstandings later. First, there had to be an untouched account of the hours surrounding Charlotte's injury, and that was precisely what seemed to be missing. And someone had taken it away. William had already decided that nobody involved would be allowed to simply walk away behind a convenient explanation. But he was about to discover that the first version of the story had another problem. Something in the record did not match. A section was missing. And the missing section was about to turn a disturbing family allegation into a far deeper palace mystery. If you believe Charlotte's warning should have mattered before anyone's title, reputation, or position, do not look away now. Stay with this story, because the next discovery was worse than the injury itself. The missing section was not buried in an old archive. It was inside the account that was supposed to explain what happened to Charlotte. That changed the investigation immediately. A report can contain mistakes. People forget times. Staff misremember conversations. Details can be entered late. But when an injury involving a child is being examined, the sequence matters. One missing paragraph can change who was present, what they knew, and whether anyone had an opportunity to stop what followed. William reportedly ordered the account preserved before anyone was permitted to rewrite the timeline. That meant comparing the version already circulating with the underlying records, staff notes, access logs, and recollections from people who had been at the family gathering. The first inconsistency concerned the timing. The account had treated the incident as a straightforward accident occurring during a private family visit. Yet the staff recollections did not line up neatly with that version. One person remembered Charlotte being separated from the group earlier than expected. Another remembered seeing her afterward behaving unusually quietly. Neither detail proved wrongdoing. Together, however, they made the original explanation less secure. The investigation then focused on the room where the private conversation had allegedly taken place. Who entered?
He doesn't want to go to sleep that much, which is a little bit of a problem, but he's
You're up a lot at night.
a little bit, yeah. Not as much as Catherine, but you know, she's doing a fantastic job. For me, Catherine and now little George are my priorities, and Lupo.
Who left? Who had been asked to leave? And who had remained close enough to hear anything? Those questions mattered because the alleged injury required more than an object being present. Someone had to explain how Charlotte came into contact with it, why the injuries appeared in the pattern described by the medical examination, and why the child reportedly feared speaking afterward. The staff were interviewed separately. That decision was deliberate. If everyone discussed the incident together, memories could influence one another. A confident person's version could quietly become the group's version. Investigators wanted individual accounts before anyone had the chance to compare stories. One account immediately attracted attention. A member of staff reportedly remembered Charlotte saying something before the injury. Not afterward, before. According to the account, Charlotte had expressed concern about the heated styling tool being left unattended. The detail was simple, but it mattered. If she had warned someone that the object was hot or dangerous, then somebody had heard the warning. And that person had a decision to make: move the object, end the conversation, call another adult, or ignore the warning. That was the point at which the investigation stopped looking only at the person alleged to have caused the injury. It began examining the people who might have prevented it. The distinction was crucial. A person can be responsible for causing harm, another person can be responsible for failing to intervene. Those are not automatically the same accusation, and investigators could not simply assign blame because someone happened to be nearby. They needed evidence. That evidence was being assembled from several directions. The medical findings established what the burns appeared to be. The photographs preserved their condition. The staff accounts established movements and timing. The family statements provided the alleged sequence of events. Then came the palace records. Access information showed who had entered and left relevant areas. Security logs could establish movement more reliably than memory. Communications records could reveal whether anyone had called for assistance or reported an incident. The deeper the comparison went, the less comfortable the original report became. A section that should have described Charlotte's warning was not present in the version initially available. That did not automatically prove that someone had deliberately removed it. It could have been omitted during drafting. It could have been considered irrelevant by whoever prepared the first account. It could have resulted from an administrative error. But there was a problem. The missing passage reportedly existed in an earlier version. That was the detail Williams' team could not ignore. If an earlier account contained a warning and the later account did not, investigators had to establish who made the change, when it happened, and why. The question became painfully simple: who changed the story? The palace environment made that question unusually sensitive. People inside royal households understand hierarchy. They understand discretion. They understand that private matters can become national headlines if handled carelessly. They also understand that a senior figure can carry enormous influence without ever giving an explicit order. That influence can affect how people remember events. It can affect how quickly a document moves. It can affect which details are described as important. William reportedly wanted none of that to interfere with the evidence. He therefore pushed for the original material to be secured and compared directly with the altered version. The comparison revealed more than a missing warning. The wording around Charlotte's movements had also changed. In one version, she had been described as remaining willingly after the gathering. In another recollection, the situation appeared less voluntary. She had been asked to stay behind while others left. That difference was not cosmetic. It changed the meaning of the entire encounter. If Charlotte had simply remained because she wanted to, the private conversation could be interpreted as ordinary family interaction. If she had been deliberately separated from everyone else, the circumstances became much more significant. Investigators also examined the staff member who had reportedly been asked to leave. That person's account became critical. The staff member did not claim to have witnessed the alleged burn. Instead, the account concerned what happened immediately before the room became private. According to the story, the instruction to leave came suddenly. There was no obvious emergency, no request for assistance, no explanation that required privacy. The staff member complied. That ordinary act now appeared important because it established how the room became isolated. Then came another problem. The heated styling tool was reportedly known to have been in use. That meant the question was not whether such an object existed. It was whether it remained hot when Charlotte was allegedly injured, who controlled it, and what happened to it afterward. Investigators looked for photographs, household routines, staff recollections, and any record showing when the object had been switched on. Again, no single detail settled the case. The significance came from the pattern: one unexplained injury, one private conversation, one missing warning, one altered account, and several people whose memories did not align perfectly. For William, that pattern was enough to justify taking further precautions around his children. He reportedly instructed that those connected to the incident should not have unsupervised access to Charlotte, Louis, or George while the matter remained unresolved. The decision had consequences. People inside the household began noticing changes. Appointments shifted, access arrangements tightened. Staff were given narrower instructions. The family did not announce anything publicly, but the internal atmosphere changed. That silence created another problem. When people are told only that an investigation is underway, they begin filling gaps themselves. Rumors spread. Some staff believed the matter involved an accident. Others believed something more serious had happened. A few understood that the altered report was becoming the central issue. No one could safely say what the final conclusion would be. Then investigators located the earlier version. It contained the missing section, and the wording was devastating because it placed another person close enough to Charlotte to hear her warning. The name was not initially released. That restraint mattered. An allegation against a real person cannot be established simply because a document contains a name. Investigators still had to determine whether the person remembered the warning accurately, whether the warning referred to the object later involved, and whether the person had understood the seriousness of what Charlotte was saying. But the discovery changed the timeline. Charlotte had apparently not entered the private interaction without concern. She had noticed something. She had spoken. Someone had heard. And then the room became private. That was the point where the investigation moved from a question of what happened to a question of responsibility. The person who heard the warning could become the key witness, or the key failure. William reportedly understood the difference. He did not need another palace rumor. He needed an answer that could survive scrutiny. So the next interviews became more direct. Who heard Charlotte? What exactly did she say? What response did she receive? Why was the warning absent from the first report? And who authorized the change? Those questions now pointed toward the same place. The original report. The document that was supposed to protect the truth had become part of the mystery. And when investigators traced the alteration back to the person who handled the report, they found a connection that William had not expected. The trail did not stop with junior staff. It led upward. And that was when the palace suddenly had something much bigger to explain quietly. If you believe a child's warning should never be erased simply because powerful people might be embarrassed, prove it with one action. Subscribe, share this story, and stay for the next chapter, because the name behind that missing section made the entire case far more dangerous. The name at the center of the altered report was not a stranger to the household. That was the detail that reportedly made William stop treating the document as an administrative problem. The person connected to the missing passage had access, familiarity with the family, and a reason to understand exactly how sensitive the incident could become. The question was no longer whether the report had been changed, it was why. Investigators reportedly reconstructed the document line by line. The earlier version contained Charlotte's warning. The later version did not. The alteration also softened the description of how she had been separated from the others. Language that suggested concern had been replaced with language that made the encounter sound routine. That difference mattered. Words such as accident, private conversation, and minor injury can steer an investigation before anyone examines the underlying evidence. Once those words enter an official record, every later reader approaches the event through the same frame. William reportedly rejected that frame. He wanted the original wording preserved, and every person involved questioned independently. The staff member whose name appeared beside the missing section was brought in first. The interview was conducted without the people connected to Camilla's household present. The purpose was straightforward. Investigators wanted the person's own recollection before pressure, fear, or loyalty could shape the answer. At first, the account was cautious. The staff member confirmed being present earlier that evening. Charlotte had been there. Camilla had been there. The atmosphere had appeared normal. Then came the moment investigators were waiting for. Charlotte had reportedly noticed the heated styling tool and warned that it was hot. The staff member remembered hearing the warning. That meant the missing sentence was not invented after the fact. It had existed in someone's original account. Investigators asked what happened next. The staff member said the warning did not trigger an immediate intervention. Instead, the staff member was asked to leave. That answer created a serious question. If a child had warned an adult about a hot object, why was the adult who heard her warning removed from the room? The staff member reportedly struggled to explain the instruction. It had seemed ordinary at the time. That was precisely what made it disturbing in retrospect. Nothing about the instructions sounded dramatic. There was no obvious confrontation, no raised voice, no alarm, just a request to leave, and an assumption that the adults involved would handle the private conversation themselves. The staff member obeyed. The door closed. The warning disappeared from the official account, and Charlotte was left inside. Investigators then examined the timing. The injury was believed to have occurred within a narrow window after the private conversation began. The medical assessment placed the burns within a time frame consistent with the previous evening. That helped establish opportunity. But opportunity was not proof. Investigators still needed to know what happened inside the room. The account attributed to Charlotte became increasingly important. She reportedly described being confronted about comments concerning her mother. She said the conversation became hostile. She alleged that the heated tool was used against her arm more than once. Those claims were serious. They also needed corroboration. The physical injuries provided part of that corroboration, but investigators could not simply assume intent from appearance alone. They examined the shape, spacing, depth, and location of the burns. The reported conclusion was uncomfortable. The marks did not look like one brief accidental touch. They appeared consistent with repeated contact from a heated cylindrical object. That finding did not identify the person responsible. It did, however, narrow the possibilities. Investigators now had a child describing repeated contact, physical evidence suggesting repeated contact, and a witness who reportedly remembered hearing Charlotte warn about the hot object beforehand. The pieces were beginning to align. Then another detail emerged. The person connected to the altered report had reportedly been involved in preparing the first account after the gathering. That created an obvious conflict. If the person knew Charlotte had issued a warning, why was that warning absent from the final version? The answer given was that the detail had been considered irrelevant. Investigators did not accept that explanation easily. A warning about a hot object immediately before an alleged burn is not an incidental detail. It helps establish sequence, awareness, and opportunity. Removing it changes the story. The interview became more direct. Who requested the omission? The answer reportedly did not come immediately. The staff member hesitated. Then came a claim that another person had advised that the incident should be described as an accident unless further evidence emerged. That sentence shifted the investigation again. Someone had apparently decided how the event should be framed before all the evidence had been gathered. William was informed. His response was reportedly immediate. No one was to alter, destroy, replace, or summarize original records without preserving the underlying material. The instruction was not about revenge. It was about control of evidence. The investigation now moved toward the person alleged to have influenced the report. Camilla's name returned to the center of the inquiry, but there was a problem. The story had begun with an allegation against Camilla, and that meant every piece of evidence had to be treated carefully. A family dispute could easily become a story of competing loyalties. A child's statement could be challenged. Staff memories could be questioned. Even medical findings could be interpreted differently. William therefore needed something stronger than a confrontation. He needed a timeline that could survive every challenge. Investigators assembled one: the family gathering, Charlotte's presence, the private request, the warning, the departure of the staff member, the alleged injury, Charlotte's behavior afterward, the initial report, the altered version, the recovered original. Each event was placed against the others, and one gap stood out. There was a period during which Charlotte was alone with Camilla, while the heated object was reportedly present. That did not prove what happened, but it established the opportunity that had previously been blurred by the altered wording. The investigation also looked at whether anyone had tried to protect Camilla from scrutiny. This was where palace hierarchy became important. A junior employee might hesitate to contradict a senior royal. A staff member might assume that a private family matter should remain private. Someone preparing a report might believe that reducing the language would prevent unnecessary scandal. None of those motives would justify falsifying evidence, but they could explain how a critical detail disappeared without anyone openly announcing that it should be removed. William reportedly understood that possibility. The danger was not only one person's alleged conduct. It was an environment in which people could become so accustomed to protecting the institution that protecting the truth became secondary. That was the issue he wanted addressed. Then the investigation produced its most uncomfortable finding. The original report did not merely mention Charlotte's warning. It reportedly identified who had been present when she gave it. That person was now more than a witness. That person could potentially explain why the warning disappeared, and investigators wanted another interview. This time, the question was not whether the warning had happened, it was who had decided it should no longer appear. The staff member was asked directly, "Who told you to remove it?" Silence. Then the answer. The instruction had reportedly come through a senior channel, not directly from Camilla, according to the account. That distinction mattered. It meant the investigation could not simply end with the person who had handled the report. Someone else had become part of the chain. William now faced a decision. He could keep the matter contained within the household, protect Charlotte from public scrutiny, and demand tighter safeguards. Or he could take the evidence beyond the family structure and risk exposing a royal dispute that could become impossible to control. He chose neither immediately. Instead, he ordered one more thing. Every person who had been present that evening would be questioned again, separately. No scripts, no shared explanations, no opportunity to coordinate, and the first new interview produced a contradiction so sharp that even the people trying to contain the situation could no longer dismiss it as a misunderstanding. One witness placed Charlotte in one room, another placed her somewhere else. One remembered Camilla leaving briefly. Another said she never left. The timeline was breaking apart, and once the timeline broke, the original report could no longer be trusted. That was when William reportedly imposed the restriction that stunned the household. Anyone connected to the incident would be kept away from his children until the investigation was complete. It was a direct challenge to the assumption that family status created automatic trust. For William, it apparently did not. Not anymore. The title of this story promised that he would be stunned by what Lewis showed him. But the deeper shock was what the evidence suggested afterward. The burn marks were visible. The missing section was recovered. The warning had been heard. And someone had still chosen to let the official story become smaller than the truth. That left one question hanging over the entire household. Who had decided that Charlotte's warning was the detail the palace could afford to lose? If that question bothers you, do not scroll away and leave the silence to speak for you. Subscribe, share this story, and stay with it, because the next chapter reveals what happened when William finally confronted the person connected to that missing section. The confrontation did not begin with shouting. It began with a document placed on a table. William reportedly sat across from the staff member connected to the altered account and pushed the original version forward. The room was quiet. No cameras, no reporters, no audience. Only the people who needed to know what had happened. The difference between the two versions was visible. One contained Charlotte's warning, the other did not. William asked one question: why was it removed? The staff member reportedly looked at the document for several seconds before answering. The explanation was that the warning had been considered unnecessary because nobody believed the object would actually cause harm. That answer created another problem. Charlotte had allegedly warned that the object was hot. If someone heard that warning, then the danger had already been identified. The question was no longer whether anyone could have known. Someone had known. William reportedly asked what happened immediately after Charlotte gave the warning. The answer was uncomfortable. The staff member had seen Charlotte react to the heated object and had heard her concern. But the instruction to leave the room had come before the situation could develop further. The staff member followed the instruction. That decision had seemed harmless at the time. Now it looked very different. William asked whether the staff member had reported the warning afterward. The answer was no. Why? Because the person reportedly believed the private family interaction was being handled by senior household members. That explanation exposed the deeper weakness in the situation. Everyone had assumed someone else was responsible. The staff member assumed the adults inside the room knew what they were doing. The person preparing the report assumed the incident could be described as an accident. Others apparently assumed the matter would remain within the family. Meanwhile, Charlotte had been left carrying the consequences. William reportedly became increasingly direct. He asked who had requested the wording change. The staff member did not identify Camilla. Instead, the instruction had reportedly moved through another senior channel. That revelation created a new layer to the investigation. If Camilla had not personally ordered the alteration, who had decided that the warning should disappear? The name reportedly given to William belonged to someone whose role involved managing sensitive household information. That person understood how reports were written. That person understood the consequences of certain words. And that person had access to the original material. William reportedly ordered the person brought in. The second interview was different. There was no confusion about what document was being discussed. The original and revised versions were placed side by side. William asked why the language had changed. The response was that the revised version was intended to prevent unnecessary escalation. That phrase immediately drew attention. Prevent escalation. It sounded reasonable. It also raised a serious question. Escalation of what? A routine accident does not normally require language to be softened after the fact. A child reporting a warning before suffering a burn is not a detail that should disappear, simply because it makes the situation uncomfortable. William reportedly asked whether anyone had instructed the staff member to protect Camilla's reputation. The answer was carefully worded. No direct order had been given. But there had been pressure to keep the description neutral. That distinction mattered. Pressure does not always arrive as a command. Sometimes it comes through expectation. Sometimes through a reminder about hierarchy. Sometimes through a suggestion that a matter is too sensitive to describe bluntly. The effect can be the same. The record becomes less complete. The truth becomes harder to reconstruct. William reportedly understood exactly what that meant. The investigation was no longer simply about an alleged injury. It was about whether the system around the family had made it easier for the truth to disappear. That possibility angered him more than the altered wording itself. Because if Charlotte had been hurt and then frightened into silence, the responsibility of the adults around her was to make sure she was heard, not managed, not softened, not buried beneath palace etiquette. He reportedly ordered the original document sealed and instructed that no further changes could be made without preserving every previous version. The restriction extended to access around the children. Anyone connected to the incident would remain separated from them until the investigation was resolved. That decision reportedly caused tension inside the family. Camilla's position made the restriction especially difficult. She was not a junior member of the household. She was the queen. But William was dealing with something he considered more important than rank: his children. The investigation then returned to Charlotte. Her account was taken again, but this time investigators avoided leading questions. They wanted her to describe the sequence in her own words. She reportedly remembered the conversation becoming tense. She remembered being told to show respect. She remembered the heated tool. She remembered trying to pull away, and she remembered the warning she had given before the situation became dangerous. The account remained broadly consistent. That consistency mattered. Children can misunderstand events. Memories can change. Fear can affect how someone describes what happened. But repeated details that align with independent evidence deserve attention. Investigators compared Charlotte's account with the medical findings. The reported pattern remained compatible with contact from a heated cylindrical object. They compared it with staff movements. The private period remained possible. They compared it with the recovered report. The warning had been present in the original version. The pieces were not identical, but they pointed toward the same critical window. Then came the question of motive. Why would anyone allegedly hurt Charlotte? That was where the investigation became more complicated. The account suggested that tensions involving Catherine, Camilla, and the children's understanding of the royal family had been building for some time. Charlotte had allegedly repeated comments about respect and family roles. Camilla reportedly believed the children were being influenced against her. If that was true, it could explain why the private conversation became confrontational. It did not excuse harm. It did not establish guilt by itself. But it provided a possible reason investigators were examining the relationship between the adults involved. William reportedly wanted those tensions documented separately from the injury. He did not want personal disagreements to become an excuse for assumptions. The central question remained simple: what happened to Charlotte, and who was responsible? Then came the moment the household had been trying to avoid. Camilla was confronted with the recovered material. The original report was placed in front of her. The missing warning was pointed out. The staff member's account was explained. The medical findings were summarized. Camilla reportedly rejected the suggestion that she had deliberately harmed Charlotte. She maintained that the injury had been accidental. But the discussion changed when she was asked about the heated styling tool. According to the account, she acknowledged that it had been present during the conversation. That admission did not prove how the injury occurred, but it established an important fact. The object described by Charlotte had been in the room. The investigation now had a physical explanation that matched the child's account. Camilla reportedly argued that Charlotte had been difficult and disrespectful. The discussion then shifted toward discipline. That distinction became critical. A disagreement with a child is one thing. Using a heated object against a child's skin would be something entirely different. William reportedly asked whether Camilla had held Charlotte's arm. The answer was disputed. Camilla denied deliberately hurting her, but the account later suggested that the conversation became increasingly emotional. The more the questioning continued, the less stable the original accident explanation appeared. Then Charlotte's alleged warning returned to the conversation. She had reportedly said the object was hot. Someone had heard her. Someone had remained silent. Someone had then allowed the official account to omit that warning. William reportedly asked Camilla whether she knew Charlotte had been frightened before the injury. The response did not resolve the question. Instead, it opened another one. If Charlotte had been frightened, why had no one stopped the private conversation? The room reportedly fell silent. For the first time, the issue was no longer being treated as a simple family misunderstanding. The consequences were becoming unavoidable. William reportedly made it clear that Camilla would not have private access to his children while the matter remained unresolved. The restriction was immediate. No unsupervised meetings, no private conversations, no exceptions because of royal rank. That decision sent a clear message through the household. Titles would not override the safety of the children. But the most damaging revelation had not yet arrived. Investigators were still tracing the altered report. They wanted to know exactly when the wording changed and who had access to it before the change. The answer reportedly led to a senior palace figure who had been involved in managing the aftermath. That person had not caused the injury. But the investigation suggested that the person had helped shape the official explanation, and that meant the palace now faced two separate questions: who had allegedly hurt Charlotte, and who had tried to make the evidence easier to dismiss. Those questions could no longer be separated. The first concerned the child. The second concerned the institution protecting her. William reportedly understood that exposing one without addressing the other would leave the same weakness in place. So he made the decision that could push the entire matter beyond the family. He would preserve the evidence. He would protect Charlotte. And if necessary, he would take the case to authorities outside the palace. That possibility reportedly terrified the people who had spent the previous hours trying to contain the situation. Because once outside investigators became involved, royal status would no longer control the process. No private explanation could erase the original report. No carefully chosen wording could remove Charlotte's warning, and no family agreement could make the evidence disappear. The next confrontation would determine whether the palace handled the matter quietly or whether the entire story was about to break beyond its walls. If you believe powerful people should never be allowed to bury a child's warning behind status and silence, do not stay passive now. Subscribe, share this story, and stay for the next chapter, because what William uncovered next made the missing report look like only the beginning. The final decision was not about protecting a royal reputation. It was about whether Charlotte would be protected when the people around her had failed to protect her before. William reportedly reached that point after the evidence could no longer be treated as a collection of unrelated details. The recovered report, the disputed accounts, the medical findings, and Charlotte's own recollection had created a picture that demanded action. The alleged burn incident had started inside a private family setting. It was now threatening to expose how that private setting had been managed afterward. William reportedly refused to let the matter disappear behind another explanation. The children were to remain separated from anyone connected to the incident until the situation had been properly resolved. Access was tightened. Private meetings were restricted. Staff were instructed to preserve records rather than rewrite them. That decision reportedly created an uncomfortable divide inside the family. On one side was the argument that the matter should remain private. On the other was the argument that privacy could not come before a child's safety. William chose the second. According to the account, he also made clear that Charlotte's well-being would come before palace convenience. The alleged confrontation had left another question unanswered. What would happen to the person who had changed the report? That issue could not simply be ignored. If a record had been altered because someone wanted to reduce embarrassment, the alteration itself had become part of the problem. If it had been changed because someone believed the original details were inaccurate, then that person needed to explain the decision. The investigation therefore focused on the chain of custody surrounding the document. Who received the first account? Who edited it? Who approved the revised wording? Who had access to the original? The answers reportedly pointed toward a senior administrative channel rather than an ordinary member of staff. That discovery mattered because it suggested the alteration was not merely a careless correction. Someone with authority had become involved. But there was still no simple answer about motive. The person connected to the alteration reportedly maintained that the goal was to prevent unnecessary panic and protect the family from an accusation that had not yet been established. That explanation sounded reasonable on the surface, yet it created another problem. Protecting a family from panic is not the same as protecting a child from harm. If the original warning had been removed before the facts were established, then the process had effectively decided which evidence deserved attention. William reportedly rejected that principle. He wanted Charlotte's account preserved exactly as given. He wanted the medical findings preserved. He wanted the original report preserved. And he wanted every person involved to understand that no royal title could make evidence irrelevant. The situation also affected Camilla's relationship with the children. The account says William imposed strict boundaries around contact. Private access was no longer acceptable. Any future family interaction would require appropriate supervision. The decision was reportedly communicated without ambiguity. The children were not to be placed in a situation where Charlotte could feel pressured into silence again. For Charlotte, however, the consequences were not simply about palace schedules. The alleged injury had changed how she viewed adults around her. She had reportedly learned that speaking could be frightening when the person being challenged held greater authority. The adults around her now had to show her something different, that speaking up would not make her the problem, that asking for help would not cause punishment, that a title did not make someone automatically trustworthy. The account suggests William and Catherine focused heavily on that reassurance. The physical injury would heal, the emotional effect could take longer. That distinction became important inside the family. The burns were evidence of what had allegedly happened. Charlotte's behavior afterward was evidence of what the experience had done to her. The story also had consequences for the staff member who had first noticed the warning signs. That person had become caught between hierarchy and responsibility. The decision to preserve the original account reportedly meant that the staff member's testimony remained part of the evidence. There was no easy escape from the situation. Speaking could damage a career. Silence could allow an incomplete version of events to survive. The staff member ultimately stood by the original recollection. That decision gave William something he had been seeking from the beginning. A record that had not been shaped around the reputation of the people involved. The alleged incident also raised questions about the role of palace culture itself. Royal households depend heavily on discretion. Staff are trained not to interfere unnecessarily. Privacy is treated as important. But there is a point where discretion can become silence, and silence can become dangerous when a child is involved. That was the larger lesson William reportedly drew from the episode. The system had been designed to protect the family from outside threats. It also had to be capable of recognizing threats from within. The most uncomfortable part was that nobody needed to issue an obvious order for the system to fail. A warning could be considered insignificant. A report could be softened. A private conversation could be accepted without question. A senior figure could be given the benefit of the doubt. Each decision might appear small. Together they could create a serious blind spot. That was why the altered report became so important. It showed how easily the first version of a story can become the version everyone remembers. William reportedly refused to allow that to happen. The final family decision remained private. There was no public announcement confirming the allegations. No dramatic statement was released. No official palace account explained the circumstances in detail. That silence left the public with no verified account of the alleged incident. Inside the story, however, the boundaries had changed. Camilla's contact with the children was reportedly restricted. Charlotte was protected from further private interactions connected to the incident. The disputed records were preserved, and the people involved understood that the matter could not simply be rewritten again. The significance of the story therefore rests less on the spectacle of a royal confrontation and more on the question it raises. What happens when a child says something is wrong, but the adults around her are more concerned with hierarchy, reputation, or keeping the peace? That question reaches far beyond a palace. It is the reason the story of Charlotte's alleged burn marks carries such emotional weight. The most powerful person in the room is not always the person who needs protection. Sometimes it is the person who cannot defend herself. And sometimes the most important decision is made quietly, before anyone outside the room knows there was a crisis. For William, the alleged discovery involving Charlotte reportedly became exactly that kind of moment. He had to decide whether family loyalty meant preserving appearances or protecting his children. According to the account, he chose his children. The alleged alteration of the report then became a warning of its own. Evidence must remain evidence, even when it is uncomfortable. A child's warning must remain part of the record, even when powerful people would rather forget it. And a private family matter does not automatically become harmless simply because the family is famous. The story ends without the public spectacle many might expect. There is no confirmed royal confession available to the public. There is no verified official record establishing every allegation described in this account. There is instead a story built around disputed claims, alleged injuries, conflicting recollections, and a palace investigation that raises difficult questions about power and accountability. That uncertainty makes one fact especially important. Charlotte's alleged warning was the detail that someone tried to remove. And once that warning was restored, the entire sequence looked different. What had appeared to be an isolated accident became a question about what people knew beforehand. What had looked like a simple family disagreement became a question about responsibility. And what might have disappeared into private palace records became a story about whether anyone would choose a child's safety over an institution's comfort. That is why the title matters. Prince William was not simply stunned by burn marks reportedly shown to him after concern over Charlotte's injury. He was confronted with the possibility that the adults surrounding his children had failed at the most basic responsibility of all: to listen, to notice, to act, and to tell the truth afterward. If this story made you question what happens when powerful people control the version of events, do not let that question end here. Subscribe to this channel, turn on notifications, and share this story so the warning at the heart of it is not forgotten, because the next royal story coming to this channel goes even deeper, and what happens next is worse and more interesting.